Socialism is attractive to people because they hear words like free healthcare and it sounds really exciting. But here is where their illusion actually breaks down.
This was the first thing that I saw when I opened up TikTok, and as a big, longtime supporter of universal healthcare, I am looking forward to hearing what this young lady has to say. First off, nobody thinks that it's free healthcare. That's why we call it single-payer healthcare. But let's just go ahead and see where she's going with this.
Healthcare isn't a thing that you just distribute out to the masses like food or shelter. Healthcare is a service, and that service requires the time, the energy, the expertise, and the labor of a real human being.
Forgive me, but as somebody whose expertise is in sustainable food cultivation and local food economies and food distribution, you think that the people who grow our food are not folks with expertise providing valuable labor and skills? How do you think food is grown? How do you think food distribution is organized? I mean, I understand that you're a Trumper, and so I'm sure you don't think that our migrant farm workers are highly skilled laborers. But you cannot be this ignorant about what is required to feed an entire nation. You cannot possibly be this ignorant about nutrition programs, supplemental food programs, safety nets like SNAP and WIC, TANF, school lunch programs, USAID. Come on, girl, come on. Also, pretending like housing is just something that you give out and also does not require skills and expertise and is something that is just like one and done. What a weird false dichotomy to create. But let's go ahead and see what else you have to say.
It's a service, and that service requires the time, the energy, the expertise, and the labor of a real human being. And at the end of the day, you are not entitled to another person's labor. See, here's the distinction, because you absolutely have the right to pursue your health. Things like clean air, clean water, a safe environment, access to good food.
I understand the phrase "you are not entitled to another person's labor" is like a big libertarian talking point. Girlfriend, we're not talking about being entitled to those things. We're talking about funding those things so that we all have the care that we need. And again, I'm not sure you really understand the profound flaw in your argument here. You seem to think that programs like SNAP or housing assistance are acceptable because those are material goods that are distributed, and you give no credit to the skill and labor and expertise, the organization and distribution behind all of that. You just see them as material goods. And you think, therefore, that services should not be funded, while perhaps in your worldview, maybe material goods should be. You mean services like the constitutional right to an attorney if you can't afford one? You mean like the fact that our society funds firefighters and EMS? You mean like the services that are funded by our tax dollars, like the park service, road maintenance, libraries, public education? What about those things? If you're saying only material goods should be funded by our tax dollars, what exactly do you mean by that? What exactly are you saying? The majority of things that are funded by our tax dollars are services. And all of them, every last one of them, require the skills, life hours, labor, expertise of other people. Now, my husband is a public school teacher. Would you say that children are feeling entitled to the labor of a teacher? No, because that teacher is being paid for their skills, their time, their expertise, and their labor. And they have chosen a vocation of educating America's kids. Under universal healthcare, that's a system where practitioners are choosing that vocation and they are being compensated for it by the universal healthcare system. They're not being used for their labor or expertise that people feel entitled to take for free. Again, just like such a deeply, deeply flawed premise to your entire argument here. Again, you then went on to say that you have a right to demand things like clean water and clean air, really good and important services that were funded by our tax dollars, although under this current regime, clean water, clean air, environmental protections have been absolutely stripped back so that corporate polluters can completely fuck over the environment and our health. The services that our tax dollars previously funded are no longer doing that under Donald Trump. But you don't have a problem with tax dollars funding those services, but you have a problem with tax dollars funding healthcare.
Safe environment, access to good food, freedom from harm. These are conditions that support your health and can reasonably be protected or guaranteed by a government or by society. But healthcare, meaning the ongoing active process of diagnosing, treating, and sometimes even operating on people, that is not a natural right. requires someone else to do something for you, something that required years of education and daily sacrifice and emotional and physical effort from another human being. When you say that healthcare is a right, you are implying that you are owed the products of someone else's labor.
Again, you are manufacturing a binary that does not exist. You think you have a right to good food and you have a right to be protected from harm. What funds those things? What funds those services that you say you have a right to? It's our tax dollars. Who funds our justice system? I realize it's semi-non-functional right now. Who funds that? Who funds law enforcement? You see all of that as a right, but not healthcare. And again, I realize you've got an agenda here, but your assessment of what is and isn't healthcare is deeply flawed. Now, I'm not a healthcare provider, but my grandfather, my dad, and my sister, all physicians. I'm pretty much the black sheep of my family. My expertise is plants. Everybody else, healthcare. You seem to think that healthcare is like treating and diagnosing diseases and doing surgeries. Part of the reason healthcare is so tremendously expensive in the United States is because we don't have preventive and supportive care. People cannot afford preventive and supportive care, and so their health has to decline significantly. They have to get into an emergency situation before they go to the hospital. That increases the cost of their care dramatically. Other countries with far better preventive care than us have healthcare that's about half as expensive as ours is. The average American spends, something between $12,000 and $14,000 a year on healthcare. How much of that is going to CEO salaries and bonuses? How much of that is going to shareholder dividends? Because most healthcare in the United States is for profit. Now, I have a nonprofit healthcare plan. Kaiser is nonprofit. They are less expensive. It's still pretty expensive, but they're less expensive. They have a lower rejection rate, a higher approval rate than pretty much any other insurance in the entire United States. Not-for-profit healthcare can and does work. You do get good care and it has much lower costs. And it gives us an idea of what it would look like to live in a country where we had universal health care that was based around accessibility, preventive care, sustainability, and affordability. Healthcare that was focused on taking care of the American people rather than the capitalist pursuit of more and more profit, shareholder dividends, extravagant CEO salaries. And I realize you had some Maha talking points in there about good food and clean air and clean water and how that should be the things that you need to pursue good health. Right? It's that really toxically pervasive Maha thinking that if you are in ill health, it must be your fault because you didn't eat clean enough. You didn't detoxify your body or whatever. Right. And I think a lot of this goes back to the fact that we don't have particularly good scientific literacy in the United States. People don't actually know that much about their own bodies and how disease processes work. And of course, it also hugely ties into ableism in this country, thinking that illness is a moral failing, that being chronically ill is somebody's fault, rather than any understanding of genetics, virology, public health, and just the natural process of human bodies aging and the wear and tear that we put on ourselves, and definitely no understanding of how the lack of preventive and supportive care, the fact that Americans are running on fumes, we have tremendous psychological and physiological and emotional stress all the time, how that impacts our health. But actually, I want to take the last part of this video here and respond to this whole idea of how healthcare should not be a right. I really would encourage us to view healthcare the same way we view libraries. I know it's frequently said that if somebody tried to invent the concept of a library in 2025, that MAGA would reject it. A lot of Americans would reject it as socialism. But we see libraries as a good and necessary part of our society and something that should be publicly funded. Do we need to use a library every single day? Most Americans, no. Are there a range of services that you might want to access at the library? Books, audiobooks, digital media, computers, internet, photocopiers, research, access to third spaces for public gatherings, Narcan, children's story times, research support. Does our need as individuals vary for each of those services at different points in our life? Yes. Do we still understand that libraries are a good cause that we should all be funding, something necessary and vital that everybody should have access to? Yes. The concept of universal healthcare is not one of free healthcare where you are exploiting other people and demanding that they do labor for you. It's not about entitlement, sweetheart. It's about creating a functional society where we all have our needs met. And it's also about creating a more efficient society where we spend less on healthcare but get better access to it. The system that we have now is incredibly broken and exploitive. It helps nobody except the CEOs. I realize that so many conservatives have a knee-jerk negative reaction to universal healthcare because they've been propagandized for 40 years by lobbyists from the for-profit healthcare industry. Healthcare should be a human right. It is in other countries. There's no reason that we cannot fund it and support it and give folks access to it here in the US.